Good afternoon and welcome to the Family Research Council's Family Policy Lecture, both to our online audience and in-person audience. My name is Irina Grosu and I'm the Director of the Center for Human Dignity here at FRC. Today's lecture is with Terry Beatley, author of What If We've Been Wrong? Keeping My Promise to America's Abortion King. Terry will speak about former abortionist and co-founder of NARAL Pro-Choice America, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, and the abortion lobby's marketing of abortion. Nathanson worked with Betty Friedan and others to legalize abortion in the U.S. After killing more than 60,000 babies, he had a profound conversion after seeing the development of the preborn baby via ultrasound. Nathanson spent the rest of his life opposing abortion, most prominently through his production of two very powerful films, The Silent Scream and The Eclipse of Reason, which have also affected me when I was becoming pro-life. Terry will reveal Nathanson's 8-point strategic marketing plan to deceive American women into accepting abortion, and his political ploy called the Catholic Strategy, an intentional strategy to separate Catholic teaching from legislative judgment. Nathanson gave Terry instructions to reveal this plan of deceit and to deliver his personal parting message to America. Terry Beatley is author, wife, mother, and president of Hosea Initiative, which exposes the abortion industry's exploitation of women. Terry has been a contributing writer for the Washington Times, WorldNet Daily, and others. She has been interviewed for articles in the Washington Post, World Magazine, the Catholic Herald, and others. Without further ado, please help me welcome Terry Beatley.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad the online audience is tuned in as well. This is going to be the fastest hour of your life. And a tremendous amount of content in a fairly short amount of time. So thank you, Family Research Council, for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity. And again, my name is Terry Beatley. I gave this talk, Keeping My Promise to America's Abortion King, but I've also nicknamed it Step, Carry, and Trust, because it's been a 7-year journey of learning how to stepping out in faith, and really for the kingdom of God, to expand the kingdom of God, to do what he tells us to do. But it's also been a 7-year journey of learning how to carry my cross, because I can tell you honestly, 7 years ago, I didn't quite understand that or appreciate it like I do today. What does that mean to carry one's cross? And then the third part is trust. As probably we've all experienced, when we go to work on something and we want to manage, the victory or manage the end results and we try to control it. Well, it's been a 7-year journey of letting go and watching God deliver. And so it's all about trusting the Lord for the end result. The other thing I want to first, I kind of joke around about this. When you're a small pea in a big pro-life initiative across America, you're a small pea in a great big pond. It's hard to develop credibility in Washington, D.C. when nobody knows you. And so I want to be able to bless you with this, that my book, and I'm going to hold up the cover right now, actually it's on the screen, What If We've Been Wrong? Keeping My Promise to America's Abortion King. I've just received the endorsement of the president and CEO of the National Religious Broadcasters, Dr. Jerry Johnson. That just came in. But before publication, I received the endorsement of the chairman of the Washington Times, Tom McDivitt, as well as Dr. Richard Land, who is the president of Southern Evangelical Seminary, as well as, I'm going to name a few others, just to give you an idea. This has been a labor of love and tenacity, because most of these people I did not know 7 years ago. Marjorie Dannenfelser with Susan B. Anthony. Deacon Keith Fournier, who years ago came to D.C. to help set up American Center for Law and Justice. Ron Brown, the assistant football coach out at Liberty University. And then Father C. John McCloskey, who was the priest who introduced the love and mercy of Jesus Christ to the man you're going to come to know as Dr. Bernard Nathanson, America's former abortion king. And so, with that ado, actually, I need to give you one warning, because according to Proverbs 24:10 through 12, once you learn something like this, it's your responsibility as a believer, if you're a believer, and to the rest of American believers. Look up Proverbs 24:10 through 12. You can't pretend that you don't know this anymore. You have to then learn it, and then you go out and apply it, because doesn't he who weighs the heart know it? So you can't sit there and tell God when you're facing the Lord on your day when he calls you home to say, God, I didn't know anything about this abortion industry. Well, now you will. So it's a warning. So if you don't want that action item at the end, you might want to cut it off. But I have a feeling you don't want to, because this will be a really informative hour. So with that disclosure, let me move on here. Why is Dr. Nathanson's story, why is his legacy of Dr. Bernard Nathanson so relevant to today? Because he started back in the 50s and 60s. What does that have to do with us today? Because isn't abortion just a personal decision, right? And the reason why he's so relevant is because he called himself the keeper of the abortion industry keys to, sorry, that went fast. The keeper of the abortion industry keys. That was his description of himself. He was there. He knows how he launched the industry of killing America's unborn children. Dr. Nathanson called himself the father of the modern day abortion industry, and he admits to unleashing the barbaric age onto America. He's a key figure. So I use this analogy when I talk far and wide. You cannot study the American Revolution without understanding who was George Washington. You cannot understand why America looks the way it does today with 60 million lost children and millions of women who suffer physically and emotionally, psychologically, because of what abortion does to them, without studying Dr. Bernard Nathanson, without knowing who he was and what he left behind. Also, he left behind his published works. Okay, you can read about what I'm about to tell you, but of course, most Americans, we live in a 140-character Twitter world. What's it like to read a book, today? But Dr. Nathanson left his legacy behind. It's in Aborting America. It's in another book called The Abortion Papers, and then his third book called The Hand of God. It's all out there, but it's been archived onto the shelves of history, and nobody's pulling it off. And I'll tell you in just a minute how I ended up making this man a promise. So considering all that, he's a relevant person to learn for American history, so you can better understand why we look the way we look today. So let's first start with his description. And pardon me, Dr. Nathanson, in his book called The Abortion Papers, his very last paragraph before the appendices, he said this. As he had become pro-life, which I'll be explaining. So this is him looking back at what he did as the medical director of what we know today as NARAL Pro-Choice America. Dr. Nathanson, quote, "I believe the abortion ethic is fatally and forever flawed by the immorality of the means of its victory, a political victory achieved by such odious tactics is at best an unstable tyranny spawned by an unscrupulous and unprincipled minority. At the very least, this disclosure of those odious tactics should compel those who are uneasy with permissive abortion to re-examine the issue. I believe that an America which permits a junta of moral thugs to foist an evil of incalculable dimensions upon it and continues to permit that evil to flower creates for itself a deadly legacy, a millennium of shame." I could stop right here. That says it all, does it not? America, that's Dr. Nathanson, the father of the modern day abortion industry, telling us the entire thing is paved on lies and propaganda, and it's unjust, and it's exploiting women. So that's why it's relevant, and that's what he had to say. But why should we care? Why should we care? We should care because every single human life is sacred. Every single human life. regardless of their economic status of their mother or father. Every single human life is sacred. Because truth matters, because women and children have been exploited for over 4 decades, because men have been stripped of their right to protect their families, because now the undeniable connection between abortion and breast cancer, because there's a multi-billion-dollar industrial abortion industry that thrives on the shedding of innocent blood. And just like slavery industry did, they use economic excuses and very selfish reasons to keep it in place. Why should we care? Because Dr. Bernard Nathanson warned us of what would happen to our country, or any country, as long as abortion is legal. And lastly, in Deuteronomy 28, if you're a believer, the Lord already tells us in Deuteronomy 28 what he will do for a country that's obedient to his laws. And he also tells us what he's going to do to a country that chooses disobedience. Okay, the laws of the nation. Okay? And so we have a big job, and we actually have at least a 4-year little window here to get things right. And I've just presented the reasons why. So I'm simply a very passionate messenger to proclaim that the abortion industry is already slayed. It's already slayed by the truth of what the abortion industry founder, the father of the modern day abortion industry, what he left us. It's already slayed. It's about to be manifested, so you see the destruction of the abortion industry, the ultimate destruction of Planned Parenthood. It's about to happen, so we can rejoice in that. And part of the catalyst behind it will be when America rallies around fulfilling the promise that was made to Dr. Bernard Nathanson. So let me begin with how in the world did I make this man a promise, and what was that promise? Like I said, it's an exercise in step and caring and trusting, and what happened was I came to the March for Life a number of years ago, probably in the early 2000s, and after that I was so moved by what I'd seen and experienced, because I really wasn't a pro-life activist, but nor was I for abortion. I just knew it wasn't right for me, but I didn't have any strong opinions about it for probably a whole host of reasons. And then when I began doing research on the history of how did we shift from overcoming slavery only to then dehumanize, really not that many years later, babies in the womb. I just didn't understand, so I began to research. And then I ran across this DVD, which I would recommend to everybody in America. It's offered through Life Dynamics, and it's called Maafa 21. Maafa is a Swahili word that means great tragedy or genocide, and it's all about the very racist eugenics history of Planned Parenthood against the African American race in this country. It's 2.5 hours long. You can see it on YouTube, or you can get these DVDs. And I took this DVD to an African American minister. I actually asked him, if you can believe this, for a 3-hour appointment. I didn't know him and he didn't know me. But I just wanted him to know the truth. This is way before Hosea Initiative and an organization. I just wanted to bless him with the truth. When I was walking into his church, I was praying and asking God, please don't let me talk about politics, because I didn't want him to think I'm there for like some vote, maybe for a side that whatever. It had nothing to do with politics. I just wanted him to know the truth. So we watched this movie for 2.5 hours, and then we talked for 30 minutes. And at the end, I said, Pastor Bibbins, tell me what you think about all this information. And this is what happened. He rolled his chair forward and he wagged his finger at me and he said, I'll tell you what I think. I will never vote for a pro-choice candidate ever again. For if I do, I'm voting to annihilate my own race. And furthermore, it's just wrong, it being abortion. And my jaw dropped, I'm sure. It's like, I cannot believe he just answered me with a political answer. And I'm just loving him with the truth. And it was like Jesus pulling back a curtain saying, see what happens when you elevate the dignity of all human life, when you're bold carrying the truth to people that maybe are not in your immediate circles, but when you're there for the right reason, when you're there to love people with the truth, it reaps tremendous fruit. And it was like my fuselage tank got lit and I was good for another 2 years. He had me come back to his church, and we did a 2-night program. We were teaching all about fetal development, and we showed the movie, and then we went over all the secular, non-biblical reasons why being pro-choice or pro-abortion logically does not make any sense. And that's before we even opened up the Word of God. It was a really fun 2 nights. Then I went quiet, and I prayed, and then in November 2009, I was in a prayer vigil at my church. I'd signed up for the first hour, only because I fall asleep by 10 o'clock. It was a very selfish reason for signing up from 7 to 8 p.m. And what happened was I'm asking the Lord, what do you want me to do with this head full of information and these amazing experiences? Because the people responded. They wanted more information. And I'm praying and I'm asking very fervently. I don't know if anybody in the audience here has ever prayed like that, but I was begging God to give me direction because I had no clue. And all I could hear, and it was very swiftly, no, not audibly, but it was this repeated thought, message, whatever you want to call it, go and interview Dr. Bernard Nathanson. Well, at that point in my life, I had already stopped my career. I was a stay-at-home homeschool mom, and I'm sitting in this little prayer room asking the Lord, why would this man, it was very intimidating, why would this man, because in my mind, he's a giant of the pro-life movement, and I'm like, why would he say yes to me, God? So I call it my Moses moment. I gave God a list of at least 17 and a half reasons why he chose the wrong woman for this job, and but he made it really clear, and long story short, I was on a plane flying up to New York 2 weeks later on December 1st, 2009. And it changed my life forever because sitting right beside Dr. Nathanson, and this picture is not my picture, I'm guessing, Dr. Nathanson, this is probably taken a year before I met him because he was much more frail. When I called up to his home in New York, his wife answered, and she said, Terry, I seriously doubt he's going to grant you an interview because he's very sick. He has terminal cancer, and he has not granted an interview in a really long time. But she said, put your request in writing, and I'll present it to him. Well, quite frankly, I thought that was a really nice New York way of blowing off a very Southern-sounding Virginian. And I really didn't expect to hear back from her, but indeed she called back and she said, yes, come on December 1st. He read your letter and he's agreed to meet with you. So when I arrived there, I sit beside him in a little wooden chair for about an hour. And that hour again changed my life forever. I had a list of questions, and again, he was very frail. He suffered from anxiety like this. And at the end of that interview, I felt such compassion for Dr. Nathanson because he knew what he was leaving behind. So it's 2009, if my numbers are correct. That meant at that point about 52 million children had lost their lives to abortionists across America. Plus, he had pushed this all across the world, which I'll explain in a minute. At the end of the interview, I said, Dr. Nathanson, if you have a message for America, I promise you I'll deliver it across our country. And then I paused, and I didn't know if he'd say, Terry, my day is done, y'all take it from here. But he didn't. He said, yes. He said, continue teaching the strategy of how I deceived America, and then tell America that the co-founder of NARAL, which is now known as NARAL Pro-Choice America, says to love one another. Abortion's not love. Stop the killing. The world needs more love. And I'm all about love now. It's about love. I'm in Washington, D.C. right now, like you. And this city is all about politics. Politics. Because we know that the people who make the laws rule the culture. But we've been fighting this thing, this beast, politically. And the answer is if we return to loving other people with truth, I can promise you, because God's already shown it, I've experienced it, that's what my book is all about, experiencing what it looks like to love people with the truth, and it slays the abortion industry because they cannot get away with their lies. So I shook his hand and I promised him, I will commit my life to fulfilling that promise till your parting message and their 8-point strategy of deception becomes common knowledge, or until Roe v. Wade is overturned. And so that is why I'm here. Okay? So what he wanted you to know, let's see, moving forward, Well, first, though, the culture and context, I think it's important. One of the things that the abortion industry got away with is making it sound like this is in the early years of the 1960s, that we need abortion because too many women are dying due to maternal complications. So what I'm going to do is just build very quickly the culture, what it looked like when Dr. Nathanson unleashed this barbaric age onto America. So back in 1930s, about 700 women a year per 100,000 births would die of maternal complications, but due to advancements in healthcare, science, medicine, and all that, by 1945 it was down to 300, and then by 1960s we were down to 30. Okay, and in fact, there were committees set up across America in little counties back in the 30s to combat maternal death. Well, by the 60s, those little committees they closed up shop because there was no need for them. Okay, so that as far as health care goes, there was no medical reason to need abortion because of, the mother may die. It was non-existent. And then the other thing is, we're in a battle of worldviews, as we still are today. There were worldviews of the past 60-some years that had been pressed onto America, and it was Margaret Sanger and Alfred Kinsey. Now, my nonprofit organization, Hosea Initiative, we give in-depth presentations on the history of Margaret Sanger, the history of Alfred Kinsey. But it's their worldview, which we call the contagion, that Sanger-Kinsey contagion. It's those two people's worldview, promiscuity, promoting promiscuity, and all sorts of promiscuity. Okay, that's Margaret Sanger, and then obviously Kinsey. And then with Margaret Sanger, eugenics, and then birth control, or controlling births of populations that she deemed unfit to live. So that's the culture we're in. Of course, the late 1950s, Margaret Sanger, she had already arranged for that birth control pill to be out on the market. So we're now like 10 years into the birth control pill, where sex is just recreational fun, right? And of course, the natural result of that are lots of babies conceived out of wedlock. But there was something else going on at that time. And there was a Christian leader, and he warned in this long letter what happens to societies that become closed to the gift of life. When a society becomes closed to the beauty of life in the womb. And so this letter was written, and what he warned of is that there would be an increase in infidelity and a decrease in morality. So do we agree, America, that that's happened a lot since 1968? Of course. The second part is there'd be a loss of respect for women. He warned of this. Okay. Third part is abuse of power, as in the government would get involved in health care. Has that happened recently? And then lastly, ultimate unlimited dominion. Now, what does that really mean? Well, we're living in it today. We've seen the videos of the baby parts being sold, STEM Express and all this. That's just one piece of it. Unlimited dominion. Because if it's not a human being, if we're really just substance, obviously that's not a biblical worldview. That's a Marxist worldview. That's a secular humanist worldview. That's a postmodernist worldview, right? So he warned of all this. Now, does anybody know who I'm talking about? Just kind of curious. Pardon?
It sounds like Paul VI.
You're exactly right. Paul VI in this encyclical called Humana Vitae, he warned of this. And that's just not a Catholic kind of thing. Okay, this is something that everybody should read as Humana Vitae, because he's spot on prophetic. And make no bones about it, half of the Catholics hated this document. Hated this encyclical. Why? Because they'd already bought the lies of Margaret Sanger, birth control and all that. And so he really sat on an island almost like by himself. Okay? A lot of people hated what he had done. But those are the warnings, those are the prophetic warnings of what happens to a culture. Now, so that's the culture in context when Dr. Nathanson shows up on the scene. And so what went wrong to have men and women demanding the right to kill a baby in the womb. Well, this is what happened. This junta of medical moral thugs that Dr. Nathanson referenced in the Abortion Papers book was made up of Lawrence Lader, who, by the way, who was believed to be the first card-carrying communist congressman in Washington, D.C. Okay? And then, of course, Betty Friedan with National Organization of Women. When she came onto the scene, she was not pro-abortion or pro-choice, okay? He worked on her for about a year, and by the time she went into the second annual conference, I guess you call it, of National Organization of Women, she was fighting for pro-abortion to be a plank in the National Organization of Women. And a lot of the women of NOW, N-O-W, left. They left the meeting. They were so angry because between Lauren Slater and Betty, they rammed it into the platform of the National Organization of Women. So that was the beginning of the sexual revolution people commandeering the feminist movement. That was the beginning right here. And then as the stars lined up, Lauren Slater and Dr. Nathanson had dinner sat at the same table, a little private party, and Lauren Slater made a statement. He said abortion should be legal in all 50 states. And Dr. Nathanson, by that point, was an OB-GYN. He was also working in the emergency room, and he was seeing women come in with botched abortions up in New York. Not thousands and thousands of women, but many women. And he was an atheist. He was a Jewish atheist, and he really thought abortion needs to be legal. He thought it would be the right thing for women. He thought he was doing the right thing. Now, the other thing I failed to tell you is, well, what did they or did they not know about babies in the womb? Back in 1969, in the I think it's called the Medical Cumulative Index. It's a journal of all medical issues, regardless of what topic. Back in 1969, there were not thousands of articles about fetal anatomy and development. There were only 5. In 1969, when they put together the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws, doctors, for the most part, didn't know anything about fetal development. It was an unknown, okay? They had been focused, like I showed you, it was all about maternal health care, not the baby. So this literally was a brand new science, fetology. It was brand new. That's the culture when they set out to legalize abortion. So here is the 8-point strategy. NARAL, organizationally, they were founded up in New York. Now, in 1967, when they had that dinner party, in 68, when they were forming NARAL and literally mapping out their strategic plan to flip anti-abortion laws in every state. They were going to go state by state. Well, of course, the first one they want to start with is the state of New York. It was not the first state. A few other states had already legalized it. But in New York, they had actually a very, very strict abortion law on the books. The baby in the womb in New York State had been protected by law for over 140 years. Okay? So they set out to first flip New York State. And the way they did it was with an 8-point propaganda campaign, which they then launched in other states, and most of those points are still going on today, to deceive you, American public, to deceive you, American women, and to emasculate every single man in America. It's a very Marxist worldview plan, and this is the way it worked. Here's the 8 points. I'm going to back up a little bit. The first thing they did was they framed the debate. They framed the debate, and they framed it around choice, because let's be honest, if NARAL had run around saying, we are fighting to make the murder the legal homicide, that is what we're fighting for. We believe it should be every woman's right to rip the baby out of the womb and make sure that baby's dead upon arrival. If they had marketed it like that, they wouldn't have gotten anywhere, right? So they framed the debate. They're the first ones out of the box, and anybody knows that usually if you're the first one, you can win that debate. And they framed it simply around choice. It's just a woman's choice. She has the right to choose. Second, they worked up the cynical slogans. And what Dr. Nathanson told me was that they worked long and hard by coming up with probably like 5 or 6 slogans. It's my body, it's a woman's right to choose, and it's all those jingles we still hear today. So the cynical slogans. The third thing he had to rely on was the media. And so for all the media out here, but back then, you probably would have been women reporters covering this case. You would have been young, and you would have been liberalized, okay, because you'd probably graduated from a secular university that indoctrinated you into this frame of thinking that abortion would be fine, good, and well. And so Dr. Nathanson, being an OB-GYN, he could tell you anything. And for the most part, the media would believe it. They would buy into it. He called it the complicit media. Now, what would he tell you, media? He would tell you this. He would say, look, we've got a problem on hand, okay? And the problem is 1 million women a year, 1 million women a year are having back alley abortions. And then he would tell the media that 5,000 to 10,000 women a year are dying of back alley abortions. Now, intuitively, as we look back, it's always easy at 2020, when you look at something years later, 2020, shouldn't we all have found a dead woman down every alley across America? There should have been dead people laying with these illegal abortions. And I'm not trying to be crass on this, but the boldness of his lie, I make it akin to the boldness of you can keep your health insurance. Okay? It's bold. It's bold, but it was a bald-faced lie. The other lie he would say is that 60% of Americans want abortion on demand legalized. 60%. Well, who can argue? Who wants to be in a minority, right? And this was all from, they hired a public relations firm for $7,500 to teach them the minutia and the psychology behind the lies, because all these were important lies. Now, what was the truth? Anybody taking notes? Here's the truth. There were not 1 million illegal abortions going on. By the way, those would have been criminal abortions because it was a criminal activity. There were about, at the high side, this is at the very most, 100,000 illegal abortions going on. Not 1 million. There were not 5,000 to 10,000 women dying every year. The number at the very, very most, and this is probably 100 people too high, but at the most 250 women were dying per year due to illegal abortions. And the real statistic for how many people what percentage wanted abortion on demand, it was 0.5% of Americans wanted abortion on demand. This reminds us of other issues that are going on today. They quote one thing, but the reality is there is way down here. Now, the other thing they did is that he justified. He'd said, look, we have all these illegal abortions. The women are going to do it anyway. We should just make it legal so that they're not felons. They're not criminals. But what did that become? The self-fulfilling lie. Because it was 100,000. He was saying 1 million. You legalize something and what happens? Right? Okay, it became the self-fulfilling lie. In a very short period of time, 1 million women a year were having legalized abortion. And then he repeated the lies. And everybody knows if you repeat a lie in the media long enough, it becomes the truth. And then lastly, he implemented something called the Catholic strategy. Because they're up in New York. And what did New York have? Lots and lots of Catholics. And NARAL is a political organization. They needed political victory. And the only way to get their political victory is to deceive enough voters. And because of the high Catholic numbers in the state of New York, they had to make sure they could persuade enough Catholic voters to support what they call pro-choice candidates. This is the way it worked. And by the way, just like it says, Dr. Nathanson called it the most brilliant political strategy of all time. And I saw this thing executed as I sat out at the Farmville debate back in October between vice presidential candidates Tim Kaine and Mike Pence. Very quiet room, about 300 people in there, and Tim Kaine executed the fourth point. I wanted to jump up on my chair and say, he's executing the straddle. And this is the way it works, okay? It was 1960s. Now keep in mind, voters had never had to contend with the abortion issue in the voting booth, okay? They'd never had to contend with this. Now they're forced with, wait a minute, do I vote for this person or this person? This person is pro-life, and this person says they're pro-life, but they believe every woman deserves the right to choose. That's right, okay? So this is the way it worked. First, NARAL would blame. They'd blame the popes, the cardinals, the bishops, and any local priest anytime a woman died of an illegal abortion. It was, those men's fault. They don't understand women, blah, 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 all that propaganda. Second, they would support any candidate or legislator who was beginning to shift on his or her position, kind of soften on this pro-choice stance, okay? Third, they would emphasize that candidate out in the media. They would promote, if you were a busy homeschool, whatever, soccer mom, and you're just reading the paper a little bit, you would think, wow, Catholic legislators, they're really shifting their position. It must be the way of the future. Yeah, okay, let me get back doing soccer. Okay, it looked like, because perception is everything, right? It looked like the Catholic Church and Catholics were just coming over to the pro-choice cause by droves. But they were working. They were trying to make this happen because they knew that if Catholics said, "Holy smoke, we cannot support a pro-choice candidate in the voting booth," NARAL would lose unequivocally, hands down, game over. So the fourth one though is still going on today, and you would think that that nobody really masterminded this, but indeed they sat around the NARAL leaders and they came up with the Catholic straddle, and it worked. It was simply this: that they had to make sure that Catholic voter would separate his or her religious doctrine from their legislative judgment. Okay, and it still goes on today. It was intentional. He called it the straddle. And you take all four of those parts, and it became the most brilliant political strategy of all time. So when I go out and I talk across the country, whether it be Catholic or Protestant audiences or an atheist audience, we have to think through this. In New York City in 2012, according to the vital statistics, 31,000 black babies lost their lives due to abortion, and only 24,000 black children were born alive. If this catches on all across America, what happens to the black race in America? So I say, isn't it better to love people with the truth? You know, sit down, invest the time. Because I can tell you now, the little bit of time I spent with this pastor back in 2009, I think now they're up to like 4 children at least whose lives have been saved. Because that minister started preaching the gospel of life. Don't bow down to this abortion industry and all of its lies. So for those of you who are taking note, this is how abortion, this is the 8-point strategy, and I think I've covered all those, the strategy of how abortion is just simply a woman's personal choice. Moving forward, and I'm keeping my eye on the clock here. I'll try to go maybe 5 more minutes and allow time for questions, okay? And so 1975, Dr. Nathanson, just fast pace. It's 1972. Because after it became legal in 1970, he began to work at the largest abortion mill in the world. They were killing about 900 babies per week in this mill called the Center for Reproductive and Sexual Health. And he worked, and he was a lobbyist. He was birthing babies at the hospital. He's aborting them at the abortion mill. He's running around to the different states trying to make abortion legalize on state law. And so then in January, he quits the abortion mill to go birth babies or be the chief of obstetrics at St. Luke's Hospital in New York City. And the Roe v. Wade decision is handed down, January 1973, and he celebrates. He's like, yes, because he helped pave the way with his propaganda campaign to make abortion legalized. He's celebrating. But 2 to 3 months later, at the hospital rolls in a brand new technology. And what was that technology but real-time ultrasound? And the father of America's abortion industry sees that baby on real time for the first time in his life. So when I was sitting beside him, I didn't think he had ever seen a baby on ultrasound, but he had. He had seen him on the still pictures that were real grainy, way back then. But he saw the baby smiling and sucking her thumb and wiggling her toes. And the most telling of all things was the heartbeat. Because they had been listening to it, which was a big scientific breakthrough back in it was either late 50s, I think, or something like that. I forget the time range. But now they could see the heart beating. And Dr. Nathanson knew immediately, it wasn't like, let me think about this. He knew immediately that they had a problem on their hand, an ethical problem, because he saw with his own eyes his second patient. So Dr. Nathanson, keep in mind, by that point, he had already aborted 5,000 babies himself, taught doctors how to do this procedure on another 10,000 human lives, and then when he was running the abortion facility, another 60,000 babies lost their lives as he managed the facility with, I think it was 35 other abortionists. So he had the blood of 75,000 babies on his hand. And he's looking at real-time ultrasound, and he's like, oh dear, we've got a problem. So he begins talking with the NARAL board of directors, telling them, we have an issue. We have an ethical issue. And he called it a Stalinist reaction. NARAL didn't care. Just like they don't care today. It's all about the money. It's all about population control. It's all about this fictitious thing we call reproductive rights. Women's health care. Tell me how killing 500,000 baby girls every year is women's health care. It's a lie. So I want to read you, and this has never been read publicly before, but here it comes, and then maybe, well, I guess we'll have to wrap up. There's so much more to this story, and it's all in the book, because what you're going to get is Dr. Nathanson's information and how it's relevant to today. I want to read you, in 1975, his resignation letter, excerpts from it, and we'll wrap up. Dear Mr. Lader, the termination of human life, even human life of a special order at any band in its spectrum, is a grave and irrevocable act. My fears are more disturbing. Our society has historically been organized around the family. The integrity of the family as a unit has suffered a series of hammer blows in the past 2 decades. Abolition of laws regulating contraception, the passing of the extended family, the loosening of divorce laws, the permissive abortion climate may conceivably be the coup de grace, the final insult. Shall we watch passively while imperceptibly but surely the fabric of our society continues to unravel? The 1954 decision of the Supreme Court desegregating public education ushered in an era of social change unparalleled in our time and touched off shameful spasms of civil disorder in our towns and our cities. The decision to strike down all laws regulating abortion in all the states of this union is of the same order of magnitude of social change, and in my opinion, has within it the same seeds of chaos. We must brace ourselves to endure another generation of public turmoil and internal violence. When the Supreme Court spoke on the abortion issue 2 years ago, it struck down all abortion statutes in this country. But the court spoke on the matter of race in 1892, affirming that segregations by race of train passengers was constitutional and moral. In 1954, it reversed itself, in effect by striking down all the laws respecting segregation in public education in the matter of Brown versus Topeka School Board of Education. Now, check this out. The judgments of the Supreme Court were never meant to be infallible or eternal. And what if we've been wrong? What if we've been wrong? If the court should soon reverse itself on the abortion issue in light of changing times and or new scientific evidence, what if we've been wrong? What an incalculable injustice will have been perpetrated. What an immeasurable, irretrievable loss will have been suffered. The annual dues to NARAL are $10 a year, and the hubris of certainty. I can no longer meet those dues. Sincerely, Bernard N. Nathanson, MD. America, we have a lot of reckoning to do. We have a lot of fixing to do. And there is a Supreme Court decision that will be overturned because truth always wins out. Truth always wins out. In this book, which I was asked to review, it's this fast-paced story. It's an easy reading story of how the setting is the defeat of the most, as far as I'm concerned, the most pro-abortion, anti-parental rights state senator in Virginia, the defeat of the senator and what that meant. And that was the first step in fulfilling this promise. I can promise you this, throughout this story, you will see how God's had my back. The entire 7-year journey, it's filled with what I call God stories because God will get the glory. The abortion industry is, and this may sound a little whatever, like far out there, but if you read the book, you'll understand. He's already shown how it's going to be destroyed. America, the United States of America, will be rejoicing one day because we will have slayed it just like we did I don't know how we're going to do it. We're going to do it with truth and with love. but it'll look like slavery. Like, how could we've existed so long, keeping people in shackles? Well, how long are we going to keep women and men and babies in the shackle of the abortion industry when the entire thing is based on lies? And then lastly, and then I'm done. Here's Dr. Nathanson meeting Ronald Reagan, because Dr. Nathanson made that video called The Silent Scream, and it was showed at the White House, and it changed Ronald Reagan's life, and then Ronald Reagan issued his personhood proclamation. And then lastly, let me just skip over here. It ends with, loving people with truth. So as the Lord would have it, when I prayed after the senator was defeated, by the way, that God would release me of this obligation. I was really begging, because I really needed to go get a regular job. And all I can tell you is it was the second time, and it came very swiftly. And what he said was, no, there's going to be a movie. And I cried. I wept, and I begged God to release me of this promise I made to Dr. Bernard Nathanson to deliver his message of love. We are called to love one another, and killing people is not love. So, I thank you. I guess I need to open it up right now for questions. Oh, and I didn't even finish that thought. I'm so sorry. See that movie reel? As of December 2016, I'm happy to tell you that Dr. Nathanson's former wife, they had been married for 30 years, and sadly it ended in a divorce, but she has the movie rights to all of Dr. Nathanson's books and his life story and all that. And she has signed a contractual arrangement where I have the 3-year exclusive movie rights to make a feature film based on the book. Okay, it's a feature film. It's not going to be a documentary. It's going to be a feature film, because we can reach far and wide. We'll be able to reach so many people on both sides of this issue and love them with the truth. So anyway, so much more to tell you. I want to open up for questions before we have to wrap up. We have about 8 minutes. Anybody have a question? Because you know me, I can keep talking about this. Anybody have a question? Nothing? Okay. So I have 2 more minutes? 2 more minutes? Okay, since I'm here in Washington, yes, sir. I'm so glad there's one question. Okay.
Oh, there'll be more.
Okay.
I was just wondering if you would just talk about him. I mean, how did, virtually everyone in the room who's worked on pro-life issues for a long time, knows of him and knows how significant he was. I mean, it's kind of hard to convey how important he was. He was really at the core of the evil that really got abortion.
Well, if I haven't made that clear in the last 45 minutes, I don't know. But I want to answer that, okay? Because I failed to mention something, and sometimes I will do this. I get going and give you all these little details and bunny trails. What happened was, after that Silent Scream movie that he made in 1984, which he wanted to know he was already pro-life. He wanted to know what goes on in an abortion to the baby. Like, what's going on in there? Because they didn't know. So he had Dr. Jay Kellinson from New Jersey, who was an abortionist. They hooked up the ultrasound thing, and they recorded what goes on in abortion. So America, let me tell you what he found out. What he discovered was that before the amniotic sac is bursted by the little instrument, the baby's already fearing something. The heartbeat goes through the roof, and the baby's backing up, and which presumptuously, I would assume in fear. And when right before that baby, what they recorded is obliterated, ripped into shreds. The baby opens his or her mouth in what Dr. Nathanson described as the silent scream of a child threatened imminently with extinction. The abortionists, when they sat down and watched this movie, and you can watch it on YouTube, if you type in Silent Scream Dr. Nathanson, the right movie will come up. It's about 30 minutes long, I think. And the abortionists quit the abortion industry. So did the nurse, just like that. They had no idea. So America awakened to the silent screams. So these silent screams haunted Dr. Nathanson for years afterwards, 84, 85, 86. And he would wake up about 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, he was still an atheist because science changed Dr. Nathanson's mind about abortion. It wasn't religion or science changed Dr. Nathanson's mind. And he drove that point home because he recognized we have lots of people in America who are atheists or agnostic. It was the science that changed this man's mind. But the science couldn't heal his heart, right? You kill somebody, obviously, you've got a heart issue. He would wake up at 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning in sweats. And he would envision like a courtroom, and he would be begging that he would be, abdicated? set free, found guilt, but he would be in sweat. He was drenched. So then he began searching and searching for how can he get rid of this baggage? Because he carried the baggage. He was pro-life. So he went back to his rabbi, and then he went to different spiritual leaders, and then his path crossed with Father C. John McCloskey, who, by the way, lives back in Virginia again. He's a Catholic priest, but they met. Their roads crossed up in New York City, where Father C. John lived for years. And so Dr. Nathanson gave him a call one day. And they began working together for 5 years of just formation. And all these suicidal thoughts that Dr. Nathanson had for years, because he was seriously contemplating suicide. After whatever, X number of years, 3, 4, 5 years, the thoughts just disappeared. And on December 8, 1996, Dr. Nathanson was actually received into the Catholic Church. He became a child of God. And for those Catholic listeners, in the church calendar, that's actually on the solemnity of the Immaculate Conception of Mary. Okay, and very interesting too. I don't know if he was the only Protestant that came to Dr. Nathanson's baptism, but Chuck Colson was probably, he may have been the only Protestant there, but Chuck Colson came, and that's all in the book. He did a radio talk about what it was like to be in St. Patrick's Cathedral, and the Paul, basically it's like Saul Paul, seeing, Saul turn into Paul right there in the St. Patrick's Cathedral. He compared it to being able to go down into the catacombs 2,000 years ago and watching people come to Christ and to repent. So Dr. Nathanson from 1996, he was a believer, and he went worldwide spreading the gospel of life and the love and the mercy of Jesus Christ. And so when he gave me that parting message, so thank you for that question, about love one another. His message is Christ's message. We can get so wrapped up in this DC stuff and politics and all that and all the traffic and the red lights. It's all about love, loving one another. Okay, so we have this nation, and of course repenting, because we know 2 Chronicles 7:14. If you're apathetic, if I've just enlightened you, just opened up your eyes, find time today, and I do mean it. Find time today. If this is new to you, and if you just have a seed, just a seed of faith, go to the Lord. Ask God to reveal his love and mercy to you, because if God can save Dr. Bernard Nathanson, if he can save Nathanson, he can save anybody. Okay? And the last idea I want to put to you is this. This huge feminist march that happened up here a couple weeks ago, angry people demanding reproductive rights and all that. All these women of America, we've been lied to, upside down and the other side. The only reason Dr. Nathanson got saved is because God chose a woman to bring the Savior of the world into. And her name was Mary. And she's for everybody. It's not just a Catholic thing. So all these women who are looking for identity, because they think their identity is anything but what God's already blessed them with. So the job's already been done. So love is the answer. And I will proclaim it here in Washington, D.C., that as this story, as this message goes far and wide, the abortion industry is done. It's over. It's game over. Our nation will repent. Donald Trump, God bless President Donald Trump. And by the way, I have 1 minute left, and I'm going to do it now. My board of directors on October 3rd voted for the first recipient of the Bernard N. Nathanson Life Award. We unanimously voted for Donald J. Trump to be the recipient because he was willing to defend the Hyde Amendment. And little did we know, in just a couple weeks, he would look at the most pro-abortion legislator of all time, and he slayed her on that debate. This isn't about politics. It's about righteousness exalts a nation. So I'm actually looking for the opportunity up here in D.C. where we will be presenting the first Bernard Nathanson Life Award. Thank you, Family Research Council, and thank you, America, for listening. And I'll put it in a little plug. President Trump, I look forward to meeting you. Thank you.